Cedar Ridge, a picturesque town nestled at the edge of a sprawling forest, thrived on its simplicity. The streets lined with mom-and-pop shops, and a single stoplight spoke of a community untouched by the chaos of urban sprawl. At the heart of it all was the Cedar Ridge Library, where Julia Blake had found her second life. Once a formidable Navy SEAL, Julia now spent her days cataloging books and organizing story hours for children. It was a deliberate choice to leave her dangerous past behind, carving out a peaceful existence for her son, Ethan, a bright 14-year-old with a penchant for coding and robotics. On a crisp Monday morning, Julia stepped out of her small cottage with Ethan in tow, both bundled against the autumn chill. "Don't forget your lunch," she reminded, handing him a neatly packed box. Ethan rolled his eyes but grinned. "Yes, Mom. You're worse than the school bell." "Better safe than hungry," she replied, tousling his hair. Ethan headed off to school, and Julia walked to the library. Her days were methodical and quiet, until they weren't. Later that afternoon, as Julia shelved a new shipment of mystery novels, her sharp instincts prickled, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. She turned subtly, her gaze landing on two men standing near the front desk. Their stiff posture, fitted suits, and deliberate avoidance of the bookshelves screamed incongruous in the cozy library. "Good afternoon. Can I help you find something?" Julia called out, masking her wariness with a practiced smile. The taller man smiled thinly. "Just looking." Julia nodded, but didn't look away. She observed their subtle gestures, the way their eyes scanned the room. Military, or law enforcement, she guessed. But why here? The men lingered only a moment longer before leaving. As the bell above the door chimed, Julia stepped to the window, watching them climb into a sleek black SUV parked across the street. That evening, as Julia prepared dinner, Ethan bounded through the door, his backpack slung lazily over one shoulder. "Mom, something weird happened today," he said, dropping his bag. Julia turned from the stove. "Weird how?" "There were these two guys, dressed all serious, outside the school. They were staring at me, but when I looked back, they walked off." Julia froze, her mind racing. The men at the library. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Did they say anything to you?" "No, but I think they were taking pictures," Ethan added, his voice tinged with unease. Julia hid her rising panic. "Okay, don't worry about it. Stay close to your friends at school, and if you see them again, tell me immediately." Ethan nodded, sensing her seriousness. That night, Julia sat by the dim glow of her laptop. Using encrypted channels, she searched for recent mentions of her name or anything tied to her military past. Her instincts had saved her countless times before, and they screamed now. Scrolling through a news feed, she froze at the headline. Viktor Malikov released after serving 12 years in federal prison. A cold weight settled in her stomach. Viktor, the notorious arms dealer, had been captured in an operation Julia led years ago. He had sworn vengeance as they hauled him away in chains. She scrolled further, finding nothing specific about Viktor's plans or his associates. But the memory of his eyes, full of hatred, haunted her. She closed her laptop, resolving to keep her family safe. The next morning, Ethan was already at school when Julia noticed the black SUV again, parked further down her street. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside, walking purposefully toward it. The driver's window rolled down, and a man with a steely expression looked up at her. "Is there something I can help you with?" Julia asked, her voice calm but firm. "Just a misunderstanding," the man replied, his tone dismissive. "Then stop lurking around my house." The man's smirk told her everything. "Good day, Miss Blake." Julia spent the day preparing, her mind working through scenarios. She checked the locks on the doors, set up a temporary security system, and called her estranged brother, Ryan Blake, a tech-savvy programmer who had helped her out of tight spots in the past. "I need a favor," she said as he picked up. "That bad?" Ryan asked, his tone light but concerned. "Maybe worse. I think someone's watching Ethan. Can you run a trace on a license plate? Send it to me. And Jules, be careful." By evening, Ryan had sent her the information. The SUV was registered to a shell company tied to the Haven Group, a shadowy conglomerate rumored to operate at the fringes of legality. Their interests ranged from corporate espionage to arms trafficking. the same world Julia had fought to dismantle during her military career. It wasn't a coincidence. They were here for her. As night fell, Julia double-checked every entry point to the house and kept a weapon within reach. She knew the quiet town of Cedar Ridge had become the battleground for a storm she couldn't avoid. For years, she had tried to leave her old life behind. But now, the shadows of her past had found her. And this time, she wasn't just a soldier. She was a mother. And nothing, no threat, no enemy, was going to harm her son. The night had been long, filled with a restless vigilance Julia hadn't felt since her days on covert missions. She sat in the living room, her senses tuned to every sound outside the house. The faint hum of crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves, even the distant bark of a dog. It all seemed amplified. Ethan slept upstairs, blissfully unaware of how close danger had come. Julia watched over him like a sentinel, her mind running through strategies. The shadows of her past weren't just lingering. They were reaching for her family. At dawn, Julia called her brother, Ryan Blake, who had stayed up running searches on the Haven Group's operations. "They've been busy," Ryan said over the phone. "This isn't just about Viktor Malikov. The Haven Group has ties to military-grade weapons, corporate sabotage, and political corruption. They've been expanding aggressively, and Cedar Ridge isn't just random. They're moving through small towns, setting up networks. But why they're after you? That's still unclear." "It's not unclear," Julia replied grimly. "Victor's free, and I'm the one who put him behind bars." Ryan hesitated. "There's more. They've got resources, jewels, government-level stuff. I traced the plate to a shell company, but the trail goes cold fast. These guys know how to cover their tracks. Can you dig deeper?" "I can try, but it'll take time. What's your next move?" Julia glanced out the window at Ethan, who was tossing a basketball in the driveway. "Keep Ethan safe. Everything else comes second." Later that morning, Julia drove Ethan to school. "Why are you being so weird, Mom?" Ethan asked, catching her furtive glances in the rearview mirror. "I'm just being careful," she replied, trying to mask her worry. "Careful about what? Those guys yesterday?" Ethan pressed, his curiosity piqued. Julia hesitated before answering. "Listen, Ethan. Sometimes my old work comes back in ways I don't expect. You don't need to worry, but I need you to trust me and stay alert. No wandering off, no talking to strangers. Got it?" Ethan nodded, though his expression remained puzzled. At the library, Julia's day passed in fragments. Every unfamiliar face, every unusual movement outside the large windows drew her attention. Her instincts told her trouble was brewing, and she had never been wrong before. The black SUV reappeared in the late afternoon, parked farther down the street this time. Julia's pulse quickened, but she didn't act immediately. Instead, she pulled out her phone and texted Ryan. "Need a live trace on the SUV's position. Now." A few minutes later, Ryan replied, "Still registered to Haven Group. Tracking your location. Got backup?" Julia frowned. "Not yet. Working on it." After locking up the library, Julia picked up Ethan from school and drove straight to the home of her old teammate, Liam Carter. Liam had served with Julia during her Navy SEAL days and now ran a private security firm in the next county. Liam answered the door in a t-shirt and jeans, his muscular frame and sharp gaze betraying his combat-honed instincts. "Well, if it isn't the legendary Julia Blake," he teased. "What brings you to my humble abode?" "I need your help, Liam," Julia said without preamble. His smile faded. "Come in." Over coffee, Julia explained everything: Viktor Malikov's release, the men in the SUV, and the Haven Group's shadowy activities. "This is bigger than revenge," Liam said after a moment of thought. "If Haven's involved, they're not just coming after you. They're working a larger angle. What's in Cedar Ridge they'd care about?" "Nothing, as far as I know," Julia replied. "It's quiet, isolated. The perfect place to disappear. Or to stage something big," Liam said darkly. Julia glanced at Ethan, who sat at the kitchen table playing a video game. "I need to keep him safe, Liam. Whatever they're planning, I can't let it touch him." "You'll need more than a locked door and good intentions," Liam said. "We can set up a safe house. I'll also get my team on Haven Group's movements. If they're local, we'll know." That night, Julia and Ethan stayed in the safe house, a secluded cabin deep in the woods. Liam's team swept the area, installing surveillance and defensive measures. "Why are we here, Mom?" Ethan asked as they unpacked their things. Julia knelt in front of him, her expression serious but soft. "Because there are people out there who think they can hurt us, but they don't know who they're dealing with." "Is this about your Navy stuff?" Ethan asked. Julia hesitated before nodding. "Yes, but this isn't your fight. You just have to trust me." Ethan nodded reluctantly. "I trust you." The following morning, Liam called with an update. "We've got intel on a Haven Group warehouse just outside of town. It's not in the system, totally off the grid. They've got armed guards and unmarked trucks coming and going at all hours." "Then that's our next stop," Julia said, her resolve hardening. "Julia, this isn't a solo mission," Liam warned. "If you're going in, you're taking backup. My team and I will support you." Julia didn't argue. She knew the stakes were too high to let pride or old habits get in the way. That night, Julia prepared for the operation. She checked her weapons, memorized the warehouse layout, and finalized her escape routes. As she worked, Ethan watched quietly from the corner of the room. "Mom." "Yeah. Are we going to be okay?" Julia paused, looking at her son. "We're going to do more than be okay. We're going to stop this. Together." Ethan managed a small smile. "Like a team?" "Like a team," Julia affirmed. But deep down, she knew the road ahead would test every ounce of her strength and resolve. The drive to the warehouse was tense and quiet. Julia sat behind the wheel, her senses heightened. Liam was in the passenger seat, his quiet confidence a steadying presence. In the back, Ethan fidgeted with a tablet, accessing surveillance feeds that Liam's team had hacked into earlier. "This place is locked down," Ethan said, glancing at the live feeds. "Guards everywhere. Cameras on every corner. Can you disable them?" Julia asked, her eyes on the road. "Already working on it," Ethan replied, his voice tinged with nervous determination. "Stay focused, kid," Liam said, glancing back. "We're counting on you." The warehouse loomed ahead, tucked behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Trucks came and went under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Julia pulled the car into a nearby grove, parking it out of sight. "This is as far as we go without being noticed," she said, stepping out. Liam and Julia slipped into the woods, their movements silent and deliberate. Ethan stayed behind in the car, connected to them via a secure radio link. "Cameras are looping," Ethan whispered through the comms. "You've got about 10 minutes before they reset." "That's enough," Julia replied. Inside the perimeter, Julia and Liam moved like shadows, avoiding the guards and security measures. They reached the warehouse wall, where Liam produced a compact tool to cut through the metal paneling. The interior of the warehouse was vast, filled with crates stamped with cryptic codes and unmarked trucks being loaded with supplies. Julia scanned the room, her eyes narrowing. These aren't just weapons. They're tech, high-grade electronics, communication systems, even robotics. Liam knelt by a crate, prying it open. Inside were components Julia recognized immediately, parts for advanced targeting systems. "This is military grade," she whispered. "How did they get their hands on this?" "Better question," Liam said, standing. "What are they planning to do with it?" As they moved deeper into the warehouse, Julia's calm crackled. "Mom," Ethan whispered, urgency in his voice. "I think they spotted something. A truck just parked near the woods where we came in. 3 guys got out, and they're armed." Julia's heart quickened. "Stay low, Ethan. Don't make a sound." Liam gestured toward a stairwell leading to a catwalk. "We'll have the high ground if they come in here." "No," Julia said. "You go. I'll handle the guards outside." "Julia, splitting up isn't smart," Liam argued. "They're after Ethan." "I'm not letting them get close," she said firmly. Julia slipped out of the warehouse, her footsteps silent on the dirt path. She spotted the men moving through the grove, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "You're sure this is where they parked?" one of them muttered. Julia drew her weapon, her mind calculating every angle. She moved swiftly, disarming the first man with a well-placed strike before he could react. The second turned, his weapon rising, but Julia's shot was faster. a clean hit to his shoulder. The third guard panicked, retreating toward the truck. Julia pursued, cutting him off and pinning him against the vehicle. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man sneered. "You think this changes anything? They know who you are. They'll find you and your kid." Julia's jaw tightened. She knocked him unconscious and tied him up before returning to the car. Inside the warehouse, Liam had made progress of his own. He accessed a terminal in the security office, pulling files onto a drive. "Find anything?" Julia asked as she rejoined him. "Plenty," Liam replied. "Shipment manifests, delivery schedules. They're moving this tech to multiple locations across the state. This isn't just a weapons deal, it's logistics for something bigger." Julia's calm crackled again. "Mom, you need to see this," Ethan said. "I hacked into their network. They're planning a coordinated attack. Major cities, power grids, communication hubs. This is way bigger than we thought." The realization hit Julia like a cold wave. The Haven Group wasn't just after her. They were using Cedar Ridge as a testing ground for a larger operation. "Get ready to move," she told Liam. "We need to get Ethan and get out of here." As they exited the warehouse, Julia's instincts flared. A convoy of vehicles approached from the main road, their headlights piercing the darkness. "More reinforcements," Liam muttered. "We're out of time," Julia said. They made their way back to the car, where Ethan was waiting, his face pale. "Mom, they're triangulating signals," he said, holding up his tablet. "They're going to find us if we don't go now." "Then we go," Julia said. She started the car, driving with precision through back roads to evade pursuit. Behind them, the warehouse erupted in chaos as Haven operatives realized they had been breached. That night, back at the safe house, Julia, Liam, and Ethan reviewed the data they had recovered. "They've got shell companies buying properties in small towns all over the state," Liam said, pointing to a map. "They're setting up infrastructure for something massive. And Viktor Malikov is at the center of it," Julia added, staring at the screen. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Julia looked at him, her resolve hardening. "We stop them. We take down every operation they have, one by one, until they can't hurt anyone else." "Sounds like old times," Liam said with a grim smile. "This time it's personal," Julia replied. As the first light of dawn crept over Cedar Ridge, Julia knew the fight was just beginning. But for Ethan, for the town, and for the justice she believed in, she was ready to face it head-on. The safe house was quiet at dawn, the kind of stillness that often preceded chaos. Julia sat at the dining table, reviewing the documents they had retrieved from the Haven Group's warehouse. Maps, logistics reports, and encrypted emails painted a grim picture. The organization's tendrils reached far beyond Cedar Ridge. Liam entered the room, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. "You've been up all night." Julia nodded. "I couldn't stop. Every lead we uncover points to something bigger." Liam leaned over the table, scanning the materials. Multiple cities. They're setting up infrastructure, power grids, communication lines, transport routes. This isn't just a weapons operation. It's a takeover. Julia sighed. "And it starts here." Ethan appeared in the doorway, bleary-eyed but alert. He'd barely slept, and Julia knew the events of the past few days had weighed heavily on him. "Any updates?" he asked, sitting beside her. "We're close," Julia said, "but we need more intel to connect the dots." Ethan pulled out his tablet, his fingers already tapping away. "Then let's find it." By mid-morning, Ryan called with urgent news. "You've got a problem," he said. "Someone on the inside is feeding information to the Haven Group. I intercepted chatter about your location. They know about the safe house." Julia's blood ran cold. "Do you know who it is?" "Not yet," Ryan replied. "But it's someone close. Be careful." Liam overheard and cursed under his breath. That's why they've been one step ahead. Someone's tipping them off. "Who?" Ethan asked. "That's what we're going to find out," Julia said firmly. The betrayal hung over them like a storm cloud as they prepared for their next move. Julia's military instincts took over, organizing their resources and planning contingencies. "We need to move," Liam said. "If they know we're here, this place is compromised." "Agreed," Julia replied. But we also need to identify the mole. If we don't, they'll keep feeding Haven our every move. Liam nodded. Let's split up. I'll take Ethan to a secondary location. You and Ryan figure out who's behind this. Julia hesitated. Letting Ethan out of her sight was a risk, but Liam was one of the few people she trusted completely. Fine, she said. Keep him safe. Hours later, Julia met with Marcus Green, her old SEAL team leader, who now worked with a federal task force. They convened in a secure location, reviewing the data Julia had gathered. This is bad, Marcus said, scanning the files. Haven's not just building an operation. They're embedding themselves into the infrastructure of these towns. If they succeed, they'll have a chokehold on every essential service. Viktor Malikov is running the show, Julia said. We take him out, and this falls apart. Marcus frowned. It's not that simple. Victor's just a figurehead. The real power lies with the Haven Group's board, hidden, untouchable. Then we flush them out, Julia said. Expose them. Marcus leaned back, considering her words. You're playing a dangerous game, Julia. I don't care, she replied. This is bigger than me. They've already targeted my son. I won't let them hurt anyone else. Meanwhile, at the secondary safe house, Ethan and Liam worked on decrypting files Julia had sent. This code is insane, Ethan muttered, staring at his screen. Whoever designed this knows their stuff. You'll crack it, Liam said, his confidence unwavering. As Ethan worked, Liam's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. New intel suggests an attack is imminent. Julia's investigating leads. Stay sharp. Liam's jaw tightened. They're ramping up. We need to be ready for anything. Back at Marcus's base, Julia and Ryan discovered a lead. A recent bank transfer tied to a shell company under the Haven Group's umbrella. The recipient? A known associate of Viktor Malikov who had once been on Julia's team during a mission gone wrong. Derek Carter, Julia said aloud, her voice laced with disbelief. He was presumed dead years ago. Apparently not, Ryan said. He's alive, and he's working for Haven. Julia clenched her fists. He knows how I operate. That's how they've been staying ahead of us. We need to bring him in, Marcus said. No, Julia replied, her voice cold. I'll handle him. The confrontation with Derek came at a safe house Julia and Liam had used years ago. Julia approached quietly, her weapon drawn, while Marcus provided cover. Inside, Derek sat at a computer, oblivious to her presence. Long time, Derek, Julia said, stepping into view. He froze, his eyes widening. Julia, didn't think I'd see you again. I could say the same, she replied. Why, Derek? Why sell us out? It's not personal, Derek said, raising his hands. Haven offered me a deal I couldn't refuse. Wrong answer, Julia said. Start talking, or I'll make this very personal. Derek hesitated, but ultimately spilled everything. Haven had approached him with promises of wealth and protection in exchange for information on Julia and her team. They've got eyes everywhere, Derek said. Even your federal friends aren't safe. With Derek's intel, Julia and Marcus identified the next phase of Haven's plan. A coordinated attack on Cedar Ridge's power grid and communication systems meant to create chaos and cover for the shipment of advanced weaponry to other cities. They're not just testing the waters, Marcus said. They're making their move. Then we stop them, Julia replied. As the team prepared for the showdown, Julia called Liam. We've got a lead, she said. Haven's going after the power grid tonight. Get Ethan out of there. On it, Liam replied. But as Julia hung up, her gut told her the battle ahead wouldn't just be about stopping Haven. It would be about who she could truly trust when everything was on the line. The night air was heavy with tension as Julia and Marcus sped toward Cedar Ridge. The town, now a quiet facade, sat on the verge of chaos. From the intelligence Derek had provided, Julia knew Haven's attack would be precise, leaving no room for error. The power grid and communication hubs would be the first targets, plunging Cedar Ridge into darkness and confusion. Her phone buzzed. It was Liam. We've got a problem, he said, his voice grim. They're here. Julia's stomach dropped. Who's there? Haven's men, Liam replied. They've surrounded the safe house. They're not subtle about it either. Where's Ethan? Julia asked, her voice tight with urgency. With me, but they're closing in fast. I've set up defenses, but I don't know how long we can hold them off. Julia's grip on the steering wheel tightened. I'm on my way. Stay inside and keep him safe. 15 minutes later, Julia arrived to find the safe house under siege. Haven's operatives had positioned themselves strategically, using the surrounding woods for cover. Sporadic gunfire echoed through the night as Liam returned fire from inside. Julia parked a distance away and signaled Marcus to flank the attackers. Her heart pounded as she crept through the shadows, her weapon drawn. Every movement was calculated, every breath steady. She took down the first man silently, her knife slicing through the darkness. 2 more fell to Marcus's precise shots, their bodies crumpling into the underbrush. Inside, Ethan crouched behind a reinforced table, his tablet clutched tightly. "Mom's coming," Liam assured him. "I can help," Ethan said, his fingers flying across the screen. "I'm looping their comms. They won't know what hit them." Liam glanced at the boy, impressed. "That's your mother's grit right there." Julia breached the house, her movements fluid and lethal. She cleared the entryway and found Liam holding the line near a shattered window. "Ethan," she called. "Here," he replied from behind cover. Relief washed over her, but there was no time to dwell. More gunfire erupted outside as Haven's operatives regrouped. "They're coming in heavy," Liam said, reloading. "These aren't just hired thugs, they're trained." "I noticed," Julia replied, her mind already calculating their next move. Ethan's voice broke through. "Mom, I intercepted a transmission. They're not just here for us. They're coordinating another attack at the power station. If they succeed, it'll cripple the whole town." Julia cursed under her breath. "Liam, we need to split. You take Ethan and head to the fallback point. I'll handle this." "No way," Liam said firmly. "We stick together. There's no time." Julia snapped. "Get him to safety." "That's an order." Liam hesitated, but eventually nodded. "You better come back in one piece." As Liam and Ethan escaped through a hidden tunnel, Julia and Marcus launched a counteroffensive. They moved like clockwork, their years of training evident in every step. Julia's focus never wavered, even as the odds stacked against them. "We can't hold this position much longer," Marcus called out, reloading. "We're not holding it," Julia replied, throwing a smoke grenade. "We're taking the fight to them." Using the smoke as cover, they advanced, picking off Haven's men one by one. Julia's precision was unmatched, every shot deliberate and deadly. By the time the last operative fell, Julia's muscles ached, and her adrenaline was beginning to wane. She leaned against a tree, catching her breath. "That's the last of them," Marcus said, scanning the area. "For now," Julia replied. "We need to get to the power station." The drive to the power station was eerily quiet. Julia knew the calm wouldn't last. As they approached, they spotted unmarked trucks and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Haven was already in motion. "This is it," Marcus said. "We go in. We end this." Julia nodded. "We can't let them win." They moved in tandem, breaching the outer fence and slipping into the shadows. The power station was a maze of machinery and control panels, its hum filling the air. Julia could see operatives wiring explosives to the main grid. "They're not just shutting it down," she whispered. "They're destroying it." "Then we stop them," Marcus said. The next few minutes were a blur of action. Julia and Marcus engaged Haven's operatives with ruthless efficiency. The sound of gunfire echoed through the station as sparks flew from damaged equipment. Julia reached the central console, where a technician frantically worked to complete the sabotage. She dispatched him with a swift strike, then turned her attention to the controls. "Ethan," she called over her comm, "I need your help." "I'm here," Ethan replied. "What do you need?" "These systems are complex. I need you to guide me through disabling the explosives and restoring the grid." Ethan's voice was steady. "Okay, Mom. I've got you." As Julia worked, Marcus held off the remaining operatives. "Hurry it up," he called over his shoulder. "We're running out of time." "I'm almost there," Julia replied, her fingers moving with precision. Finally, the last explosive was disarmed, and the grid began to stabilize. "We did it," Ethan said, his relief palpable. "Not yet," Julia replied, turning to Marcus. "Where's Victor?" The answer came moments later when Viktor Malikov appeared, flanked by heavily armed guards. He stepped forward, his expression smug. "Julia Blake," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long." "Funny," Julia replied, raising her weapon. "I was about to say the same thing about you." Victor laughed. "You think you've won? This is bigger than you, bigger than Cedar Ridge. My work will continue, with or without me." "Not today," Julia said. The ensuing firefight was brutal. Julia and Marcus fought with everything they had, their determination unwavering. Victor's guards were skilled, but they weren't prepared for Julia's ferocity. In the end, it was Julia who cornered Victor. "This is for my son," she said, pulling the trigger. As the dust settled, the power station was secured. Julia stood amid the chaos, her chest heaving. Marcus approached, his expression solemn. "It's over," he said. "For now," Julia replied. When Julia reunited with Liam and Ethan at the fallback point, she pulled her son into a tight embrace. "You did good, kid," she said, her voice breaking. "So did you," Ethan replied, his eyes shining with pride. But as they drove away, Julia knew this was only the beginning. The Haven group might have been dealt a blow, but the fight was far from over. The morning after their victory at the power station, Julia and her team regrouped at a remote location provided by Marcus. It was an abandoned ranger station deep in the woods, offering cover and a secure base of operations. Ethan worked tirelessly at his laptop while Julia and Marcus reviewed the data they had retrieved from Haven servers. "What do we have?" Julia asked, her voice low but firm. Ethan didn't look up from the screen. "A lot. Shipment logs, encrypted communications, even blueprints. But the most alarming thing? They're not stopping." The power grid attack wasn't the main event. It was a distraction. "A distraction for what?" Marcus asked. Ethan clicked through a series of files, pulling up a map of several cities. They've been setting up similar operations in other towns. Cedar Ridge was just their testing ground. They've already moved assets to larger cities. Julia leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "What kind of assets?" "Advanced targeting systems, military-grade drones, and something labeled Project Zenith," Ethan replied. "Whatever that is, it's their endgame." Julia turned to Marcus, her expression resolute. "We need to stop this. If they're gearing up for something bigger, we can't let them get ahead of us." "I've already got agents digging into their connections," Marcus said. "But Haven's good at covering their tracks. We'll need a coordinated strike to take them down." Ethan interjected, "Mom, there's more." Victor wasn't just running this operation. He was working with someone higher up, a name that keeps popping up in the files. Elliot Voss. Julia stiffened at the name. "Voss. I've heard of him. Ex-military turned corporate magnate. He's been linked to weapons development, but nothing ever sticks." "Because he makes sure it doesn't," Marcus said. "If Voss is involved, this goes way beyond Victor. He's the puppet master." The next step was clear. Find Voss and expose him. But it wouldn't be easy. His operations were shrouded in secrecy, and Haven had spent years building an impenetrable network. Ethan worked through the night, decrypting more files and tracing financial transactions. By dawn, he had a breakthrough. "Mom, I found something," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "There's a shipment leaving tonight from a private airfield outside Cedar Ridge. It's headed to a Haven-controlled facility in Denver. If we intercept it, we might find out what Project Zenith is." "Then that's where we go," Julia said without hesitation. By the time they arrived at the airfield, Julia, Marcus, and Liam had a solid plan. Julia would infiltrate the hangar while Marcus provided sniper cover and Liam handled their escape route. Ethan remained in the mobile command vehicle, monitoring the situation through hacked security feeds. The airfield was quiet, its hangars bathed in the glow of floodlights. Julia slipped past the perimeter, her movements silent and precise. Inside the hangar, she found the shipment. Several large crates labeled with cryptic codes and Haven's insignia. She opened one to reveal sleek black drones equipped with advanced weaponry. "These aren't just surveillance drones," Julia whispered into her comm. "They're armed. High capacity, High-tech. Ethan's voice crackled in her ear. Mom, I'm picking up chatter. They know you're there. The hangar doors burst open as Haven operatives poured in, their weapons drawn. Julia ducked behind a crate, her mind racing. Marcus, I need cover, she called. On it, Marcus replied, taking out 2 operatives with clean shots from his sniper rifle. Julia moved swiftly, her training kicking in. She neutralized one attacker with a well-placed shot, then disabled another with a brutal takedown. Liam's voice came through the comm. Julia, your exit's compromised. You'll need to find another way out. I'm not leaving without the intel, she replied. Julia fought her way to the central console in the hangar, where she downloaded the shipment's manifest onto a flash drive. As the file transfer completed, she spotted a name buried in the documents. Elliot Voss, Zenith Control Protocol. Got it, she said, pocketing the drive. Time to go, Marcus urged. Julia made her way to an emergency exit, but more operatives were closing in. As she prepared to fight her way through, a drone activated above her, its targeting system locking on. Ethan, Julia shouted. I need that drone offline. I'm on it, Ethan replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Seconds later, the drone powered down, falling harmlessly to the ground. Nice work, Julia said, escaping into the night. Back at their base, Julia and Ethan examined the data. The manifest revealed that Project Zenith was a system of weaponized drones capable of autonomous targeting and deployment. If operational, it could turn any city into a battlefield. Denver is the hub, Marcus said, pointing to the files. If we hit them there, we can dismantle Zenith before it goes live. It's a long shot, Liam said, but it's our best chance. Julia looked at her team, her resolve unshakable. Then we take it. We end this. That night, Julia sat with Ethan, who was working tirelessly on his tablet. Hey, she said softly, you've done so much already. You don't have to do this. Ethan looked up, his expression determined. Yes, I do. This isn't just about us, Mom. It's about everyone. If we don't stop them, who will? Julia felt a surge of pride. You're a lot braver than I was at your age. Ethan smiled. I learned from the best. The next morning, the team prepared for their mission in Denver. As they loaded their gear, Marcus pulled Julia aside. You know this could be it, right? He said. No coming back from this. Julia nodded. I know, but if we take out Zenith, it'll all be worth it. Marcus smiled faintly. That's why you're still the best. As they set out for Denver, Julia felt the weight of the battle ahead. But she was ready. For Ethan, for Cedar Ridge, and for the countless lives that could be saved, she would see this through to the end. Denver's skyline glimmered against the night, a maze of lights and towering structures masking the shadowy forces operating beneath its surface. Julia and her team sat in a parked van a block from Haven's main facility. It was a nondescript building in an industrial district, its true purpose hidden behind layers of shell companies and falsified records. Ethan worked furiously at his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. I've tapped into their security network, he said. Cameras, alarms, everything. If we're doing this, now's the time. Julia glanced at Marcus and Liam. You both ready? Marcus checked his rifle, his calm demeanor masking the storm beneath. Always. Let's make it count, Liam added, securing his gear. Julia's gaze shifted back to Ethan. Stay in the van. Monitor our comms. If something goes wrong, you get out of here and alert Ryan. Ethan met her eyes, determination etched into his young face. I won't let you down. You never do, Julia said, placing a hand on his shoulder before stepping out into the cool night air. The plan was simple but high stakes. Infiltrate the facility, retrieve the data on Project Zenith, and disable its operational core. Marcus would provide overwatch, while Julia and Liam handled the ground assault. Julia approached the perimeter, moving through the shadows with practiced precision. Liam was at her side, his movements equally silent. 2 guards by the west entrance, Marcus whispered over the comms. On it, Julia replied. She and Liam coordinated effortlessly, taking out the guards with non-lethal precision. As they breached the entrance, Ethan's voice crackled in their earpieces. You're in. First corridor on the left leads to their server room. They moved quickly, navigating the sterile halls, lined with unmarked doors and surveillance cameras. Ethan kept them updated, looping camera feeds and disabling alarms as they advanced. In the server room, Julia plugged in a device Ethan had prepared, which began extracting data from the facility's mainframe. 5 minutes, Ethan said. The files are encrypted, but I'll break them once they're downloaded. Make it fast, Julia said, her senses on high alert. Suddenly, Marcus's voice cut in. You've got company. Multiple hostiles converging on your position. Julia cursed under her breath. Liam, hold the door. As Liam positioned himself, the first wave of Haven operatives arrived. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing through the narrow halls. We're pinned down, Liam shouted. Hold them off, Julia said, her focus on the progress bar ticking slowly toward completion. Upstairs, Marcus spotted additional reinforcements arriving via rooftop access. They're bringing in more, he warned. You need to move. We're almost there, Julia replied, her voice strained. Got it, Ethan shouted through the comms. Download complete. But there's more. They're activating Project Zenith. I'm seeing countdown protocols. You've got less than 30 minutes before it goes live. Julia ripped the device from the terminal. Time to end this. Ethan, where's the operational core? Sublevel 3, Ethan said. I'll guide you. Julia and Liam fought their way through the facility, each corner bringing fresh waves of attackers. Marcus provided sniper support, taking out guards who flanked them from above. As they descended into the sublevels, the air grew colder, the hum of machinery louder. They reached a massive steel door marked with the Haven insignia. This is it, Ethan said. I'm unlocking it now. The door slid open, revealing the operational core. Rows of servers and advanced machinery filled the room, pulsating with energy. In the center stood a sleek console displaying the Zenith countdown. 28:12, 28:11. They've already started it, Julia said, rushing to the console. Can you stop it? Liam asked, covering her as more guards approached. Not without Ethan's help, Julia replied, her hands moving over the controls. Back in the van, Ethan's fingers flew over the keyboard. I'm in. I can delay the countdown, but you'll need to destroy the servers to stop it completely. Understood, Julia said, pulling out a pack of explosives. Julia, you've got more hostiles inbound, Marcus warned. They're not letting you walk out of there alive. Julia ignored the rising tension. Liam, cover me while I plant these charges. Liam nodded, holding the line as Julia moved swiftly, placing explosives at key points around the operational core. As the final charge was set, the console blared a warning. Manual override initiated, Ethan said. Someone's in the building. They're trying to accelerate the countdown. Who? Julia demanded. Her question was answered when Elliot Voss entered the room, flanked by heavily armed guards. You've been a nuisance, Julia, Voss said, his tone calm but menacing. But this ends here. The standoff was brief but explosive. Julia and Liam engaged Voss's guards in a brutal firefight, their movements synchronized as they fought to hold their ground. Voss retreated to the console, his fingers flying across the controls. You can't stop it, he taunted. Zenith will redefine warfare, and you'll go down as nothing more than an obstacle. Julia moved toward him, her weapon trained. You've already lost. Before Voss could respond, Julia fired, hitting his shoulder and forcing him away from the console. Ethan, status, she shouted. Charges are ready, Ethan replied. Get out of there. Julia and Liam began their retreat, fighting off the remaining guards as they ascended to the surface. Marcus coordinated their exit, taking out stragglers who pursued them. Once outside, Julia triggered the explosives. The ground shook as the facility erupted in flames, a fireball illuminating the night sky. Zenith is offline, Ethan confirmed. You did it. Julia exhaled, her body sagging with exhaustion. It's over. As the team regrouped, Marcus approached Julia, his expression serious. You stopped Zenith, he said. But this isn't the end. Voss has other operations. This was just one piece of his empire. I know, Julia replied, but we'll be ready. Ethan stepped forward, his tablet in hand. I downloaded everything before we destroyed the servers. We've got the evidence to expose Voss and Haven. Julia smiled, pride swelling in her chest. Good work, kid. As dawn broke over Denver, Julia and her team prepared for the next phase of their fight. Haven might have been dealt a major blow, but their battle was far from over. For Julia, the stakes had never been higher. She wasn't just fighting for justice, she was fighting for a future where her son could live without fear. And she would win. The glow of dawn spilled over the Denver skyline, painting the city in hues of amber and gold. For the first time in days, the tension in Julia's chest eased. The explosion that had brought down Haven's operational core was both a victory and a warning. They had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. In the safe house on the outskirts of the city, Julia sat at the kitchen table with Ethan. His tablet was open, files streaming across the screen. The data he had pulled from the Zenith servers was a trove of information, enough to dismantle Haven's operations and expose their corporate backers. "This is everything," Ethan said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and pride. "Bank accounts, shipment logs, even internal emails. We can take them down for good." Julia placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, Ethan. Better than I ever could have hoped." Ethan smiled, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed the toll the last few days had taken. "I learned from the best." Marcus and Liam entered the room, their expressions grim but determined. "We've analyzed the data," Marcus said, dropping a folder on the table. "It's more than we expected. Haven's reach extends into government contracts, corporate deals, and private military firms. This isn't just one company, it's a network." Julia flipped through the folder, her jaw tightening. "And Elliot Voss is at the center of it." Liam leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "He'll be harder to corner now. After what happened at the facility, he'll go underground. But this?" He gestured to the files. "This can bring the whole operation down. Then we take it public," Julia said. The plan was straightforward but dangerous. Using the evidence Ethan had decrypted, they would expose Haven's corruption to the world. Marcus's contacts in the federal government and media would ensure the information reached the right people. But Julia knew this would paint a target on all of them. "We won't be able to stay in the shadows after this," Marcus warned. "We were never in the shadows," Julia replied. "They came after us, and they'll keep coming unless we finish this." That evening, the team set their plan into motion. Marcus coordinated with a trusted journalist, delivering the files in encrypted bursts. The story would break within hours, naming names and detailing Haven's global web of corruption. Ethan monitored the situation from the safe house, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "It's going viral," he said, his excitement barely contained. "Every major outlet is picking it up. Haven won't be able to hide from this." Liam nodded. "Good. Let's see how they like being in the spotlight." As night fell, Julia prepared for the inevitable retaliation. Haven wouldn't go down quietly, and Voss wouldn't sit idly by while his empire crumbled. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice hesitant, "what happens after this?" Julia paused, looking at her son. "We rebuild. We make sure they can't hurt anyone else. And we move forward, together." Ethan nodded, his resolve matching hers. The retaliation came faster than expected. Vehicles surrounded the safe house, and armed operatives moved in. Julia, Marcus, and Liam took defensive positions, their weapons ready. "They're desperate," Marcus said, peering through the scope of his rifle. "They know this is the endgame." "Then let's finish it," Julia replied. The firefight that followed was brutal. Haven's operatives were skilled, but Julia's team fought with the precision and ferocity of seasoned warriors. Julia moved like a force of nature, protecting Ethan while dismantling the attackers with ruthless efficiency. Liam covered the rear, holding off waves of reinforcements. Marcus picked off targets from a hidden vantage point, his sniper rifle echoing through the night. As the last operative fell, the silence was deafening. The safe house was intact, and Julia's team stood victorious. Ethan stepped out from his hiding spot, his face pale but determined. "They're not getting back up from this, are they?" "No," Julia said, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Not this time." The next morning, the fallout from the leaked files was global. Governments and corporations severed ties with Haven, freezing their accounts and launching investigations. Elliot Voss disappeared, his name plastered across news outlets as the mastermind behind one of the largest corruption scandals in decades. Julia, Ethan, Marcus, and Liam watched the coverage from a secure location. "It's done," Marcus said. "For now," Julia replied. "Voss might be gone, but people like him don't stay down for long." In the weeks that followed, Julia began rebuilding her life. Cedar Ridge was quiet again, though the scars of the past remained. She resumed her work at the library, finding solace in the routine. Ethan flourished, using his skills to help local organizations strengthen their cybersecurity. He had grown through the ordeal, his confidence tempered by the lessons he'd learned. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan spoke. "Mom, do you think it's really over?" Julia thought for a moment. "Not entirely, but we've done what we needed to. And if it ever comes back, we'll be ready." Ethan smiled. "Yeah, we will." In the quiet of the night, Julia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had fought battles she never wanted to face, confronted enemies from her past, and protected the person she loved most. For now, peace had returned. But Julia knew that the strength of family, of community, and of standing for what's right would always be her greatest weapon. Months later, a small package arrived at Julia's doorstep. Inside was a single piece of paper bearing the words, "We're still watching." Julia stared at the message, her expression unreadable. She folded the paper, placed it in her pocket, and looked out at the horizon. "Let them watch," she said softly. For Julia Blake, the fight for justice would never truly end, and she wouldn't have it any other way.